Welcome to OLC 4.0. This is term 1A. We are working on class 9 and we are still working on lesson 4. Key question for kind of the second half. Hopefully we get finished today, but if we don't, we'll finish it off tomorrow. We are in week 3 and this is Jillian Percy. We are on September 16th, 2025. Here are all the ways to contact me. The studio number is 1-800-465-7144. Remember that if you call, you will also be on air, just like I am right now. The office number is 1-800-667-3703, and the extension is 2211. Also remember that that is answered during the day, 4:30 after we don't have a secretary, and so those phones don't get answered. I'm sorry. My email is jillian.percy@nnec.on.ca. My alternate email, jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. My Facebook, capital G, capital P, ERCY, space, capital W, AHSA. If you try and reach out to me on Facebook, please don't just send a friend request. Also tell me what class you're in and what your question is. Otherwise, I just get like a little ding and I don't really know who it is. And sometimes it's, sometimes there's always people out there trying to do crazy stuff. YouTube. Those are where I keep the recorded classes. There is my teacher channel, which is G Percy Wassa. Make sure that you get the most current playlist on there. And then the Wassa Distance Education YouTube channel, that's the school channel. It will have all the different courses that were taught last year and this year. So again, make sure you locate the right playlist. When you hand in assignments, send it to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. Always make sure that right on your physical assignment, you have your full name, your course name, your assignment number, and your name. If an assignment asks for both a rough and a good draft, please label which one is which and include them both in the same email. This way the secretary can log that you submitted work and it's available to retrieve later on. There are multiple ways to hand in assignments. You can go to the DEC at your learning center, ask them to scan it and send it to me. Hang on to your originals. Do not throw out any originals till you are finished the course and have like physically got a report card in your hand, okay? Because we use them all the time. You can fax it to me at 1-800-463-7852. Just give me a heads up to turn on the fax machine. You can scan it yourself using a scanner app on your phone and then send it to me. I discourage people from mailing to me, but it is possible to do. But again, make sure you hang on to the originals. But it takes much longer and there's always postal strikes. It's just not the best way to do it, okay? You can share documents with me through Google Docs. Make sure to include me as somebody who's allowed to view or edit it. Sometimes people forget that and then I get blocked. I can't see anything. You can also take a photograph of your assignment. Generally, people do that if they're writing, like by hand, their stuff. When you do that, the photo needs to be clear and not blurry because you've got to be able to read it. Try to make sure you write in pen or write really dark if you're writing in pencil, because for some reason pencil doesn't photograph very well. Don't just click the share button, okay? If you hit instead email as an attachment or send as an attachment, it comes up in a format that's much easier for me to download and print. When you just email it, it just comes up at a wacky kind of size and it's tricky to use. Let me see. Yep, that's all good. This is a little poster on how to use the scanner app. I use Adobe Scan. It's free. You're welcome to use any scanner you like. Now, it's not really that much different than taking a photograph, except that the quality is so much higher. It honestly looks more like you just handed me a printed copy rather than a photograph. This is especially helpful if you're sitting somewhere where it's dark or you've got uneven light, because it kind of seems to adjust for that sort of stuff a little bit. You obviously download the app, open up the app, line up the corners or use the border to line it up. Take all the pictures of each page that you have in your assignment. Hit continue when you're ready. Now it'll let you preview. You can reorder things, crop things, retake things if you need to. Hit save PDF, give it a name, and then save it. Google Drive, Dropbox, OneDrive, wherever you keep your stuff, and then send me an email and attach it. Okay. That is the most reliable way, especially if you're going to be sending most of your assignments through photograph. Okay. All right. Again, still in Unit 1, Lesson 4, working on reading strategies and skills. Our lesson goals, we already have worked on this, but creating and punctuating compound sentences, using a variety of reading strategies before, during, and after reading narrative materials, demonstrating your understanding of narrative materials by locating information, making inferences, making connections, tracking and recording information and ideas, and using a dictionary to help you yourself understand unfamiliar words. Okay, so we had reached basically this point in the story yesterday. If you have, or if you are just joining us, make sure you go back and read the beginning of the story because there's some stuff there that you want to hear about, okay? It says, "Better where you are," said the sergeant major, shaking his head. He put down the empty glass and, sighing softly, shook it again. "I should like to see those old temples and fakirs and jugglers," said the old man. "What was it you started telling me the other day about a monkey's paw or something, Morris?" "Nothing," said the soldier hastily. "Leastways, nothing worth hearing." "Monkey's paw?" said Mrs. White, curiously. "Well, it's just a bit of what you might call magic, perhaps," said the sergeant major offhandedly. His three listeners leaned forward eagerly. The visitor absent-mindedly put his empty glass to his lips and then set it down again. His host filled it up for him. "To look at," said the sergeant major, fumbling in his pocket. "It's just an ordinary little paw, dried to a mummy." He took something out of his pocket and proffered it. Mrs. White drew back with a grimace, but her son, taking it, examined it curiously. "And what is there special about it?" inquired Mr. White, as he took it from his son, and having examined it, placed it upon the table. "It had a spell put on it by an old fakir," said the sergeant major, "a very holy man. He wanted to show that fate ruled people's lives, and that those who interfered with it did so to their sorrow. He put a spell on it so that three separate men could each have three wishes from it." His manner was so impressive that his hearers were conscious that their light laughter jarred somewhat. "Well, why don't you have three, sir?" said Herbert White cleverly. The soldier regarded him in the way that middle age is wont to regard presumptuous youth. "I have," he said quietly, and his blotchy face whitened. "And did you really have those three wishes granted?" asked Mrs. White. "I did," said the sergeant major, and his glass tapped against his strong teeth. "And has anybody else wished?" persisted the old lady. "The first man had his three wishes, yes," was the reply. "I don't know what the first two were for, but the third one was for death. That's how I got the paw." His tones were so grave that a hush fell upon the group. "If you've had your three wishes, it's no good to you now, then, Morris," said the old man at last. "What do you keep it for?" The soldier shook his head. "Fancy, I suppose," he said slowly. "I did have some idea of selling it, but I don't think I will. It has caused enough mischief already. Besides, people won't buy. They think it's a fairy tale, some of them, and those who do think anything of it want to try it first and pay me afterwards." "If you could have another three wishes," asked the old man, eyeing him keenly, "would you have them?" "I don't know," said the other. "I don't know." All right, so key question 4. So stop now. Don't read any further in the story, and don't go any further in the video until you finish this question, okay? What questions do you have in your head now as you are reading this section of the story, now that you've finished it? It could be anything, questions about the paw, the characters, the wishes, or anything else that seems relevant that you might want to know more about. Try to think of at least two good questions. Just so you know, what makes it a good question? Is it a reasonable question based on the events and characters in the book so far? Generally, open-ended questions are often more interesting and useful rather than just yes or no questions. And think about, If you got the answer, would the answer be important to the theme or plot, or would it be relatively important? Like, let's say I asked, how old is so and so? Well, I don't know if we're going to find out. And if we did, would it matter? So try to ask questions that would, if you heard the answer, would actually make a difference to understanding or really appreciating the story. Okay? Just 2 questions. Take a moment and write something down. Okay. When you feel like you're ready again, then start the video again, and we'll keep on reading. He took the paw, and dangling it between his forefinger and thumb, suddenly threw it upon the fire. White, with a slight cry, stooped down and snatched it off. Better let it burn, said the soldier solemnly. If you don't want it, Morris, said the other, give it to me. I won't, said his friend doggedly. I threw it on the fire. If you keep it, don't blame me for what happens. Pitch it on the fire again, like a sensible man. The other shook his head and examined his new possession closely. How do you do it? He inquired. Hold it up in your right hand and wish out loud, said the sergeant major. But I warn you of the consequences. Ooh, sounds like the Arabian Nights, said Mrs. White, as she rose and began to set the supper. Don't you think that you might wish for 4 pairs of hands for me? Her husband drew the talisman from the pocket, and then all three burst into laughter, as the sergeant major, with a look of alarm on his face, caught him by the arm. If you must wish, he said gruffly, wish for something sensible. Mr. White dropped it back into his pocket, and placing chairs, motioned his friend to the table. In the business of supper, the talisman was partly forgotten, and afterwards the three sat listening in an enthralled fashion to a second installment of the soldier's adventures in India. So at a certain time, by the way, in Britain, a lot of soldiers would have done service out in India. There was kind of a huge um, British colony, I guess, basically there. Um, so that's kind of what they're quizzing him about. If the tale about the monkey's paw is not more truthful than those he's been telling us, said Herbert, as the door closed behind their guest, just in time for him to catch the last train, we shan't make much out of it. Did you give him anything for it, father? Inquired Mrs. White, regarding her husband closely. A trifle, said he, coloring slightly. He didn't want it, but I made him take it, and he pressed me again to throw it away. Likely, said Herbert, with pretended horror. Why, we're going to be rich and famous and happy. Wish to be an emperor, father, to begin with, then you can't be henpecked. He darted around the table, pursued by the maligned Mrs. White, armed with an antimacassar. I had to look that up because I wasn't sure what that was. It is a special cloth that you placed on the back of a couch to keep the dirt off of it. So I picture in my head like a really fancy white doily or something, and the idea being because they didn't have a lot of resources to clean things, it would keep, if people's hair was dirty or they had dirt on their clothes or whatever, it would help to keep the couch clean, basically. Mr. White took the paw from his pocket and he eyed it dubiously. I don't know what to wish for, and that's a fact, he said slowly. It seems to me I've got all I want. If you only cleared the house, you'd be quite happy, wouldn't you? Said Herbert, with his hand on his shoulder. Well, wish for £200 then. That'll just do it. Okay, so this is another point, again, because I'm reading an older story, so I'm having to stop a little bit and check on things. I didn't really know, like, at that time, how much was £200. So this story was written in 1902, so about 120 something years ago. If you are just looking at the numbers, like if it was talking about £200 today, British money would equal about 375 Canadian dollars. But in the time frame it was written in, £200, just looking at inflation, would be worth about $62,000 Canadian today. But its purchasing power would have been much greater than what we would think of $62,000 buying. So, for example, at that time, a small house in Britain could be purchased for 100 to 200 pounds. So, this isn't really a small amount of money. It's enough money for him to finish paying off his house. So, he might not have a small house. Maybe he's got a little bit bigger house, which sounded like they were around 300 or 400 pounds. So basically, he wants enough money to pay off his entire mortgage. So not a small amount, right? Sounds like pocket change, but it's not. Okay. His father, smiling shamefacedly at his own credulity, held up the talisman as his son, with a solemn face somewhat marred by a wink at his mother, sat down at the piano and struck a few impressive chords. "I wish for 200 pounds," said the old man distinctly. A fine crash from the piano greeted the words, interrupted by a shuddering cry from the old man. His wife and his son ran towards him. "It moved!" he cried, with a glance of disgust at the object as it lay on the floor. "As I wished! It twisted in my hand like a snake." "Well, I don't see the money," said his son as he picked it up and placed it on the table, "and I bet I never shall." "It must have just been your fancy, father," said his wife, regarding him anxiously. He shook his head. "Never mind, though. There's no harm done, but it gave me a shock all the same." They sat down by the fire again while the two men finished their pipes. Outside, the wind was higher than ever, and the old man started nervously at the sound of a door banging upstairs. A silence unusual and depressing settled upon all three, which lasted until the old couple rose to retire for the night. "I expect you'll find the cash tied up in a big bag in the middle of your bed," said Herbert, as he bade them good night, "and something horrible squatting up on top of the wardrobe, watching you as you pocket your ill-gotten gains." He sat alone in the darkness, gazing at the dying fire and seeing faces in it. The last face was so horrible and so simian that he gazed at it in amazement. It got so vivid that with a little uneasy laugh, he felt on the table for a glass containing a little water to throw over it. His hand grasped the monkey's paw, and with a little shiver he wiped his hand on his coat and went up to bed. So now the little two is showing you that it's the second chapter, okay? In the brightness of the wintry sun next morning, as it streamed over the breakfast table, he laughed at his fears. There was an air of prosaic wholesomeness about the room, which it had lacked on the previous night, and the dirty, shriveled little paw was pitched on the sideboard with a carelessness which betokened no great belief in its virtues. "I suppose all old soldiers are the same," said Mrs. White. "The idea of our listening to such nonsense! How could wishes be granted in these days? And even if they could, how could 200 pounds hurt you, father?" "Might drop on his head from the sky," said the frivolous Herbert. "Morris said the things happened so naturally," said his father, "that you might, if you so wished, attribute it to coincidence." "Well, don't break into the money before I come back," said Herbert, as he rose from the table. "I'm afraid it'll turn you into a mean, avaricious man, and we shall have to disown you." His mother laughed and followed him to the door, watching him down the road, and returning to the breakfast table, was very happy at the expense of her husband's credulity. All of which did not prevent her from scurrying to the door at the postman's knock, nor prevent her from referring somewhat shortly to retired sergeant majors of bibulous habits, when she found that the post brought a tailor's bill. So I don't know what a bibulous means. So what are my options when I stumble across a word I don't know? There's more than one way to handle it when you come across unfamiliar words. If you understand everything else you're reading, one word might not be all that important. You might just skip over it. However, if it seems more important, then you might look at the context clues that are there in the sentence and make a reasonable guess of what might be an appropriate synonym. Or you can check in the dictionary especially if you feel like that word might be very important, or if the entire passage is a bit confusing and you think, maybe if I knew the word, this would make more sense. So, my guess, bibulous context clues, it says, nor prevent her from referring somewhat shortly to retired sergeant mayors of bibulous habits when she found that the post brought a tailor's bill. So they had received a bill to pay, but she was hoping that there was going to be money at the door. So maybe bibulous means that someone's lying or that they're unbelievable. I wasn't really sure, so I looked it up in the dictionary, and the dictionary said it actually means somebody who's fond of or addicted to drinking. So in this context, I think she's sounding like he was so drunk that he was just kind of making up lies or stories. So in kind of one way I was right, because I was thinking she was talking about him being unbelievable, but I was also kind of wrong. I never heard that word to refer to somebody being drunk before. Herbert will have some more of his funny remarks, I expect, when he comes home, she said, as they sat at dinner. Now, I didn't notice this originally, but there's kind of a little bit of time lapse because they were just having breakfast and now suddenly it's become dinner. I think they mean like a late lunch, not like supper time. But I didn't notice it at first, was a bit confused because all of a sudden he was in the next line, he's pouring himself out beer, and I'm like, oh, he's having beer for breakfast. Okay. I dare say, said Mr. White, pouring himself out some beer. But for all that, that thing moved in my hand, that I'll swear to. You thought it did, said the old lady soothingly. I say it did, replied the other. There was no thought about it. I had just— What's the matter? His wife made no reply. She was watching the mysterious movements of a man outside, who, peering in an undecided fashion at the house, appeared to be trying to make up his mind to enter. In mental connection with the 200 pounds, she noticed that the stranger was well dressed and wore a silk hat of glossy newness. 3 times he paused at the gate and then walked on again. The 4th time he stood with his hand upon it, and then with sudden resolution flung it open and walked up the path. Mrs. White at the same moment placed her hands behind her, and hurriedly unfastening the strings of her apron, put that useful article of apparel beneath the cushion of her chair. She brought the stranger, who seemed ill at ease, into the room. He gazed at her furtively, and listened in a preoccupied fashion as the old lady apologized for the appearance of the room and her husband's coat, a garment which he usually reserved for the garden. She then waited as patiently as her sex would permit for him to broach his business, but he was at first strangely silent. I, I was asked to call, he said at last, and stooped and picked up a piece of cotton from his trousers. I come from Ma and Megan's. The old lady started. Is anything the matter? She asked breathlessly. Has anything happened to Herbert? What is it? What is it? Her husband interposed. There, there, mother, he said hastily. Sit down, and don't jump to conclusions. You've not brought bad news, I'm sure, sir? And he eyed the other wistfully. I'm sorry, began the visitor. Is he hurt? Demanded the mother wildly. The visitor bowed in assent. Badly hurt, he said quietly, but he is not in any pain. Oh, thank God, said the old woman, clasping her hands. Thank God for that, thank— She broke off suddenly as the sinister meaning of the assurance dawned upon her, and she saw the awful confirmation of her fears in the other's averted face. She caught her breath, and turning to her slower-witted husband, laid her trembling old hand upon his, and there was a long silence. He was caught in the machinery, said the visitor at length in a low voice. Caught in the machinery, repeated Mr. White in a dazed fashion. Yes. He sat staring blankly out at the window, and taking his wife's hand beneath his own, pressed it as he had been wont to do in their old courting days nearly 40 years before. He was the only one left to us, he said, turning gently to the visitor. It is hard, The other coughed and, rising, walked slowly to the window. The firm wished me to convey their sincere sympathy with you in your great loss, he said, without looking round. I beg that you will understand, I am only their servant, and merely obeying orders. There was no reply. The old woman's face was white, her eyes staring and her breath inaudible. On the husband's face was a look such as his friend the sergeant might have carried into his first action. I was to say that Ma and Megan's disclaim all responsibility, continued the other. They admit no liability at all, but in consideration of your son's services, they wish to present you with a certain sum as compensation. Mr. White dropped his wife's hand and, rising to his feet, gazed with a look of horror at his visitor. His dry lips shaped the words. How much? £200 was the answer. Unconscious of his wife's shriek, the old man smiled faintly, put out his hands like a sightless man, and dropped, a senseless heap, to the floor. Okay, so question 4 is continued. 4A. The author is not stating it directly, so you will need to use your ability to infer what has happened to the son. B. In your opinion, why does the wife shriek and the husband faint when the man tells them the amount of money they are being given? Again, the story doesn't say it directly, so you're going to have to put 2 and 2 together, or what we call infer. Okay, that is not the end of the story, just so you're aware. We are now on chapter 3. In the huge new cemetery, some 2 miles distant, the old people buried their dead and came back to a house steeped in shadow and silence. It was all over so quickly that at first they could hardly realize it, and remained in a state of expectation as though of something else to happen, something else which was to lighten this load, too heavy for old hearts to bear. But the days passed, and expectation gave place to resignation, the hopeless resignation of the old, sometimes miscalled apathy. Sometimes they hardly exchanged a word, for now they had nothing to talk about, and their days were long to weariness. It was about a week after that the old man, waking suddenly in the night, stretched out his hand and found himself alone. The room was in darkness, and the sound of subdued weeping came from the window. He raised himself in bed, and he listened. "Come back," he said tenderly. "You will be cold." "It is colder for my son," said the old woman, and she wept afresh. The sound of her sobs died away on his ears. The bed was warm and his eyes heavy with sleep. He dozed fitfully, and then slept until a sudden wild cry from his wife awoke him with a start. "The paw!" she cried wildly. "The monkey's paw!" He started up in alarm. Where is it? What's the matter?" She came stumbling across the room towards him. "I want it," she said quietly. "You've not destroyed it?" "It's in the parlor, on the bracelet," he replied, marveling. "Why?" She cried and laughed together, and bending over, kissed his cheek. "I only just thought of it," she said hysterically. "Why didn't I think of it before?" "Why didn't you think of it? Think of what?" he questioned. "The other 2 wishes," she replied rapidly. "We've only had one." "Was not that one enough?" he demanded fiercely. "No," she cried triumphantly. "We'll have one more. Go down and get it quickly, and wish our boy alive again." The man sat up in bed and flung the bedclothes from his quaking limbs. "Good God, you're mad!" he cried, aghast. "Get it," she panted. "Get it quickly and wish. Oh, my boy, my boy!" Her husband struck a match and lit the candle. "Get back to bed," he said unsteadily. "You don't know what you're saying." "We had the first wish granted," said the old woman feverishly. "Why not the second?" Go and get it and wish, cried his wife, quivering with excitement. The old man turned and regarded her, and his voice shook. He he had been dead 10 days. And besides, I would not tell you else, but I could only recognize him by his clothing. If he was too terrible for you to see then, how now? Bring him back, cried the old woman, and she dragged him towards the door. Do you think I fear the child I have nursed? He went down into the darkness and felt his way to the parlor, and then to the mantelpiece. The talisman was in its place, and a horrible fear that the unspoken wish might bring his mutilated son before him ere he could escape from the room seized upon him, and he caught his breath as he found that he had lost the direction of the door. His brow cold with sweat, he found his way around the table and groped along the wall until he found himself in the small passage with the unwholesome thing in his hand. Even his wife's face seemed changed as he entered the room. It was white and expectant, and to his fears seemed to have an unnatural look upon it. He was afraid of her. Wish, she cried in a strong voice. It's foolish and wicked, he faltered. Wish, repeated his wife. He raised his hand. I, I wish my son alive again. The talisman fell to the floor, and he regarded it fearfully. Then he sank, trembling, into a chair, as the old woman with burning eyes walked to the window and raised the blind. He sat until he was chilled with the cold, glancing occasionally at the figure of the old woman peering through the window. The candle end, which had burned below the rim of the china candlestick, was throwing pulsating shadows on the ceiling and walls until with a flicker larger than the rest it expired. The old man, with an unspeakable sense of relief at the failure of the talisman, crept back to his bed, and a minute or two afterwards the old man came silently and apathetically beside him. Neither spoke, but lay silently listening to the ticking of the clock. A stair creaked, and a squeaky mouse scurried noisily through the wall. The darkness was oppressive, and after lying for some time screwing up his courage, he took the box of matches and, striking one, went downstairs for a candle. At the foot of the stairs the match went out, and he paused to strike another, and at the same moment a knock, so quiet and stealthy as to be scarcely audible, sounded on the front door. The matches fell from his hand and spilled in the passage. He stood motionless, his breath suspended until the knock was repeated. Then he turned and fled swiftly back to his room and closed the door behind him. A third knock sounded through the house. "What's that?" cried the old woman, starting up. "A, a rat," said the old man in shaking tones. A rat. It passed me on the stairs." His wife sat up in bed listening. A loud knock resounded through the house. "It's Herbert!" she screamed. "It's Herbert!" She ran to the door, but her husband was before her, and catching her by the arm, he held her tightly. "What are you going to do?" he whispered hoarsely. "It's my boy! It's Herbert!" she cried, struggling mechanically. "I forgot it was 2 miles away. What are you holding me for? Let go! I must open the door." "For God's sake, don't let it in," cried the old man, trembling. "You're afraid of your own son?" she cried, struggling. "Let me go! I'm coming, Herbert! I'm coming!" There was another knock and another, and the old woman with a sudden wrench broke free and ran from the room. Her husband followed to the landing and called after her appealingly as she hurried downstairs. He heard the chain rattle back and the bottom bolt drawn slowly and stiffly from the socket, and then the old woman's voice, strained and panting. "The bolt!" she cried loudly. "Come down! I can't reach it!" But her husband was on his hands and knees, groping wildly on the floor in search of the paw. If he could only find it before the thing outside got in. A perfect fusillade of knocks reverberated throughout the house, and he heard the scraping of a chair as his wife put it down in the passage against the door. He heard the creaking of the bolt as it came slowly back, and at the same moment he found the monkey's paw and frantically breathed his last and third wish. The knocking ceased suddenly, although the echoes of it were still in the house. He heard the chair drawn back and the door opened. A cold wind rushed up the staircase, and a long, loud wail of disappointment and misery from his wife gave him the courage to run down to her side, and then to the gate beyond. The street lamp flickering opposite shone on a quiet and deserted road. That is the end of the story. All right, and key question number 4 continues. Number 5, what does the wife believe is at the door, and what emotions is she feeling? Number 6, what does the old man believe is at the door, and what emotions is he feeling? Why are they different or the same as his wife's emotions? So remember we talked about how you have to infer sometimes, you have to kind of read between the lines because it doesn't always spell it out exactly. So to answer those questions, you're going to have to infer a little bit, okay? Number 7, this story does not say exactly, but what do you believe the old man wished for as his third wish? Tell me the wish and explain the reasons why you think that's what he wished for. Describe what you visualized being behind the door. Number 9, the ending of this story is somewhat ambiguous, which means you don't know for sure what happened. Do you like this style of ending or not? Explain what you like or dislike about the ending. 10a, what genre is this story? Explain your reasons for your choice. Remember we talked last class about all the different genres. B, what type of conflict was this story about? Identify the main character and who or what they are in conflict in. So again, we talked about 7 different types of conflict. Remember, person against themselves, person against person, let's see, person against society, person against technology, persons against supernatural. There's a couple more. Check the list, see what it is, and who is the main character, and who or what are they in conflict against. As you were reading the story, did you agree more with the mother, who wanted to open the door, or the father, who wanted to keep the door closed? Explain any experiences from your own life or personal beliefs that had an effect on which character you wanted to win the disagreement over the door. In other words, if you were in the story, would you have opened the door? Why? Or why not? Number 12. Describe the main events of this story in order. This is order, sorry, in order. Only list the most important events. Underline the climax of the story. So, first of all, it's important to put them in order, not just kind of randomly. And it's important to think about the most important thing because it's a long story, so you don't want to include every little detail. Things that if you left out, the story would not make sense. Small things like, what food they were eating at breakfast is probably not important, okay? And the climax is the most important part. It might not be the ending though, right? Remember how we talked about there's like a little plot graph? Hang on a second, let me see if I can quickly, hang on. There we go. So remember we talked about the plot graph before? So the climax is the part where it's up here. There are still events that happen down here as things are wrapping up, okay? So tell me all the events, whatever they are, including the climax. Underline the climax, but don't stop there. Make sure to tell me the other things that happen after the climax as well, okay? Makes sense? All right. 13. There are a lot of unusual words in this story. I think it's a really great story. It's kind of a classic. So I felt like it was a good one to choose for us anyways. Partially it's because it was written a long time ago. Remember, we've talked about how language changes a lot. So there's all sorts of new words that didn't exist when my mom was young. And by the same token, there's words that people used back in 1902 that we just don't use anymore. Or sometimes the meanings can change. That's not uncommon too. So I picked three of the words that I thought might be hard to understand. Please look them up in either an online or a print dictionary, doesn't matter which one, and tell me what they mean. Then use them in a sentence of your own. So don't use the one in the dictionary, don't use the one from the story, make up your own, but make sure it makes sense. If for some reason any of these words don't appear in the dictionary that you have, because it's possible they might not since they're older words, then you can give your best guess. If you really want, you could kind of grab another word that's also hard because there are sort of a lot of them. So we've got Rubicund, Fakir, and Simeon. So I want to kind of walk through this just because it's one of those things that I sometimes find people do part one and they forget to do part two. So I'm picking the word prosaic instead. And I looked it up and it said, without interest, imagination, or excitement. That's my definition. A lot of people stop here, which means they only get half the mark. So this is worth 2 marks. This is 1 mark. And writing a new sentence is a second mark. If you copy this sentence out of the book or if you copy it out of the dictionary, I'm not going to count it. So it's got to be your own sentence, okay? His job at the fish factory was prosaic and boring, okay? At that point, when you're finished that, and I know it's a lot, but then you would be finished key question number 4, and you would hand it in. I was kind of making sure we got through that today if we could, because tomorrow is what? Wednesday. We'll start working on key question 5, and hopefully we'll get finished unit 1 this week. If you are having any troubles with this, send me an email. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. I've already had some students handing me in assignments, and I think they're going really well. So I'm looking forward to seeing how people are doing. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow.